I came to the bank on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning to close my account. But when the teller pulled up my file, all the color drained from her face. She looked at me, her voice trembling slightly, and whispered, "Ma'am, have you seen the balance on your account?" There was $27 million in it. I had never seen that kind of money in my entire life. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again, and I'm so glad you're here with me. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Carol Simmons. Before all of this happened, I would have described my life as quietly decent, unremarkable. I was 53 years old, living in a modest two-bedroom house in Marietta, Georgia. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved from their driveways, mowed their lawns on Saturdays, and nobody asked too many probing questions. I had worked as a medical billing coordinator for the exact same hospital system for 19 years. I drove a 2016 Honda Accord. I clipped grocery coupons on Sunday mornings. I was, by all accounts, not a woman who expected surprises. My husband, Dennis Simmons, had passed away 14 months before that Tuesday morning. A massive heart attack. It was sudden, brutal, and cruel. Right there in our kitchen while he was waiting for the coffee machine to brew. We had been married for 26 years. I won't pretend every single one of those years was a fairy tale, but I loved him. I loved him the way you love something that has become a fundamental part of your own architecture. Quietly, structurally, without fanfare. After he died, I moved through my grief the way most widows do. Slowly, unevenly, with occasional, devastating crashes into emotional walls I didn't see coming. That Tuesday, I walked into the First National Bank branch on Roswell Road with one simple, final goal. I wanted to close the joint savings account Dennis and I had shared for decades. I assumed it had maybe $400 in it, leftover money from a vacation fund we had started but never actually used. I had already moved on from our joint checking account. This savings account was the very last financial loose end, and I just wanted it gone. I wanted to stop seeing his name printed next to mine on official paper. It hurt too much. The teller who helped me was young, maybe 25, with her hair in a neat bun and the practiced, polite smile of someone trained to be pleasant under pressure. She asked for my ID, took the account number I handed her, and began typing. And then her expression completely changed. It was subtle at first, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, a quick, panicked dart of her eyes up to my face, and then immediately back down to the glowing monitor. She swallowed hard, excused herself, and disappeared behind a frosted glass partition. I wasn't alarmed yet. I assumed it was a bureaucratic hiccup. Maybe the account had been flagged as dormant because we hadn't touched it in years. Maybe I needed to provide a certified copy of Dennis's death certificate. These things happen. I casually checked my phone, read a few emails, and waited. What I did not expect was the branch manager walking out to greet me. His name was Mr. Aldridge. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, possessing the kind of careful, solemn posture that suggested he had delivered very difficult news before. He shook my hand and quietly asked if I would step into his private office. The phrasing was polite, but his tone made it clear that it was not optional. "Mrs. Simmons," he said gently, once the heavy glass door was pulled securely shut. "Before we proceed with the closure of this account, I need to ask you a question. Are you currently aware of the exact balance on this account?" I smiled politely. Yes, of course. It should be around $400, give or take. Mr. Aldridge didn't smile back. He slowly turned his computer monitor around to face me. The number glowing on the screen was $27,413,088.52. I remember that exact figure because I stared at it for what felt like a full, agonizing minute without taking a single breath. $27,413,088.52, sitting quietly in a savings account I thought held our modest vacation fund. "Ma'am," Mr. Aldridge said, his voice incredibly careful. "You did not know about this." "No," I whispered. The word came out so small it barely made a sound. He nodded slowly, in the manner of a man choosing his next words with surgical precision. He told me he could not legally discuss the source of the funds without further authorization and documentation. But he did tell me that the account had seen significant, massive activity over the past 3 years. Frequent deposits, partial transfers, multiple transactions, and absolutely none of them were small. He told me that before any closure or withdrawal could proceed, the bank would need to conduct a thorough internal review. And he strongly suggested that, given the staggering amounts involved, I might want to consult a high-level attorney. I drove home in a state of absolute shock. I sat in my Honda Accord in my own driveway for 15 minutes before I could force my legs to move and carry me inside. The house looked exactly the same as it always did. Dennis's reading glasses were still sitting on the side table because I hadn't found the emotional strength to move them. The faint scent of the vanilla candle I had burned the night before still lingered in the air. Everything was identical, and yet absolutely nothing was. $27 million in our account, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I had trusted Dennis implicitly for 26 years. But sitting alone in that quiet kitchen, I began to do something I had never allowed myself to do before. I began to look back at my marriage and question everything. I thought about the occasional, vague business trips he took that he never fully explained. I thought about the second cell phone I had found in his briefcase once, which he smoothly brushed off as a temporary work phone. I thought about the way certain hushed phone conversations seemed to abruptly end the second I walked into the room. Had I been too trusting? Had I confused genuine love with willful, comfortable blindness? And then came the question that truly chilled my blood. If there was $27 million sitting in a joint account, whose money was it really? And who else in the world knew it was there? I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay in the dark, watching the ceiling fan slowly turn, my mind spinning dangerously out of control, pulling at threads I had spent a quarter of a century purposely ignoring. Dennis had been a commercial real estate consultant. At least, that was what he told people at dinner parties. And it was true as far as it went. He ran a small LLC called Simmons Property Group, registered in Georgia. I had seen the standard contracts. I had occasionally met his clients. For most of our marriage, our income was comfortable, but entirely unremarkable. We lived well, but not extravagantly. We took one moderate vacation a year. We had a standard retirement account and a paid-off mortgage. Absolutely nothing about our financial reality suggested hidden millions. So where on earth had $27 million come from? And when? By 3 a.m., I was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of me was my laptop, a legal notepad, and the heavy fireproof lockbox I kept shoved under the guest room bed. This was the box I had painstakingly gone through 14 months ago when I was managing his estate. Or rather, what I believed was his estate. I had found nothing unusual back then. A standard life insurance policy, the retirement account, our joint checking account, and this joint savings account, which I had simply noted on a piece of paper and set aside to close when I felt emotionally ready. Had I looked at the balance back then? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to remember. I was almost certain I had seen a paper statement early in my grief, and it had shown a tiny balance. But now I wondered, had I really looked at it? Or had I just seen what my grieving brain expected to see and thrown it in a drawer? I opened my laptop and pulled up the bank's online portal using my own credentials. The account was right there. The balance was right there. All 27 million of it, looking enormous, menacing, and impossible on my screen in the dead of night. I clicked into the transaction history. The massive deposits went back exactly 3 years. Large, irregular, staggering amounts. $400,000 here, $1.2 million there. And every single incoming wire was from an entity listed only as SRG Capital Holdings. I had never heard that name in 26 years of marriage. The transfers were always incoming, never out, except for two massive withdrawals in the final 8 months of Dennis's life. One withdrawal for $800,000, another for $1.1 million. Both wired out to an offshore account number I didn't recognize. My hands were ice cold. I briefly thought about calling my son Michael, who lived in Nashville. But Michael absolutely idolized his father. I wasn't ready to drop a bomb that would destroy his memory of Dennis until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I thought about calling my sister, Pat, but Pat was a notorious gossip. Whatever this was, it needed to stay absolutely buried until I understood the danger I was in. What I needed was a lawyer, and not the polite, sleepy estate attorney I had used after Dennis died. He was Dennis's contact, someone Dennis had chosen, and suddenly that detail felt incredibly dangerous. I needed someone new, someone vicious, someone who belonged entirely to me. I also desperately needed to find out who or what SRG Capital Holdings was. The next morning, I called into the hospital and took a personal day, the first one I had taken in over 2 years. I didn't open my laptop at home. Instead, I drove to the public library. Call it instinct. Call it the sudden, creeping onset of paranoia. I simply did not want to search for these names on my home Wi-Fi network. I sat down at a public computer. SRG Capital Holdings was a Delaware-registered LLC. Beyond the basic corporate registration records, there was almost zero public information. No website, no news coverage. They used a generic registered agent in Wilmington, which meant almost nothing. Thousands of anonymous shell companies used Delaware agents to hide their true owners. But when I pulled up the state's secondary filing history, I found a name listed as the managing member. And that name stopped the breath in my throat. Raymond Stokes. I knew that name. I knew it very well. Raymond Stokes had been Dennis's college roommate. He was the best man at our wedding. But he was also someone I had not seen or spoken to in nearly 15 years, following a sudden, bitter falling out that I had never fully understood. Back then, Dennis had simply told me that Raymond had gotten involved in some questionable business dealings and that he needed to legally distance himself to protect our family. I had accepted that explanation without pressing. I had trusted my husband to protect us. Now, sitting in a quiet library corral in Marietta, Georgia, I thought about Raymond Stokes. I thought about $27 million. I thought about 2 unexplained, massive offshore withdrawals. And right there, surrounded by dusty books, I made a decision. I was going to find out everything. Quietly, carefully, legally. I was not going to close that bank account. I was not going to tell a single soul what I knew. And I was going to find the most ruthless financial fraud attorney in the state of Georgia before I took a single, visible step. Was I afraid? Yes. My heart hadn't stopped its frantic hammering since I sat in the bank manager's office. But fear, I was quickly learning, is not the same thing as weakness. Fear is information, and I had just received a massive, terrifying dose of it. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table, writing down every single name I could remember from Dennis's professional life. Every associate, every client, every friend I had been too trusting to question. The attorney I found was named Sandra Okafor. A colleague at the hospital had mentioned her name once in the context of a brutally messy, high-asset divorce. "She's the one you want if you need someone who doesn't flinch," my colleague had whispered. That was exactly what I needed. I called her office on Wednesday morning and secured an appointment for Friday afternoon. Her office was located in a sleek, mirrored building in Buckhead. It was clean, intimidating, and deliberately understated. Sandra herself was a Nigerian-American woman in her mid-40s, with close-cropped hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and the kind of piercing, focused attention that made you feel like every single syllable you spoke was being analyzed and filed away as ammunition. I laid everything out for her in chronological order. The bank visit, the $27 million balance, the transaction history, SRG Capital Holdings, the offshore withdrawals, and finally Raymond Stokes. I handed her the printouts and placed Dennis's heavy fireproof box on her pristine glass desk. She listened for 20 minutes without interrupting me once. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, her eyes locked onto mine. "Mrs. Simmons, do you know whether your husband left a will?" "He had," I replied. "I probated it myself last year. He left everything to me and my son Michael in equal shares. The entire estate was valued at roughly $340,000. The retirement account, the equity in the house, nothing remotely approaching $27 million. Sandra's expression didn't change, but her expensive pen tapped sharply against her legal pad. "The savings account was joint," she explained smoothly, "which means technically, as the surviving joint account holder, those funds passed directly to you by operation of law the exact second your husband's heart stopped. They've bypassed probate entirely. They legally belong to you." I felt a dizzying rush of adrenaline. "But," Sandra continued, her voice dropping a fraction, "the real question is where that money actually came from, and whether it represents the proceeds of a criminal enterprise that creates massive legal liability for you, or a dangerous claim by violent third parties." She looked at me steadily. "We need to know exactly what SRG Capital Holdings was doing in the dark." Sandra immediately brought in a forensic financial investigator she worked with regularly, a brilliant, cynical former IRS agent named Howard Price. I agreed to his exorbitant fee, wrote the retainer check with hands that were surprisingly steady, and went back to my ordinary life to wait. But my ordinary life had fundamentally changed. It had developed a chilling new quality, the distinct, crawling sensation of being watched. It started small. A car I didn't recognize parked twice on my quiet street in the span of 1 week. A dark blue sedan with tinted windows and Georgia plates. It was parked in a different position each time, but it was the exact same car. I was absolutely certain of it. Then came the phone calls, unknown numbers ringing at 9 p.m., only to click and disconnect the second I answered. And then, 10 days after I hired Sandra, I received a voicemail. It was from a man with a smooth, gravelly voice who identified himself only as an old friend of Dennis's. He casually mentioned that he'd heard I was asking questions around town and said he would love to catch up over coffee to help me out. I did not call him back. I sent the recording straight to Sandra. "Document everything," she commanded. Howard Price worked much faster than I expected. 3 weeks after we hired him, he called me back into Sandra's Buckhead office and slid a thick, damning folder across the glass table. SRG Capital Holdings was not a consulting firm. For the better part of 7 years, it had been a highly sophisticated shell company used to funnel, launder, and hide massive, undeclared kickbacks from 3 corrupt commercial property developers in Florida and South Carolina. The arrangement was brilliant in its criminality. The developers had been artificially inflating their construction contract costs, skimming millions of dollars off the top, funneling the stolen money through entities like SRG, and distributing the dirty proceeds to a small group of individuals who provided cover, using fake consulting agreements. Dennis, my quiet, boring, dependable husband, had been one of those individuals. He was a professional money launderer. And Raymond Stokes, the former best man at our wedding, had been the architect of the entire criminal empire. "The $27 million is not entirely your husband's," Howard Price said grimly, tapping the financial flowcharts. "My best estimate is that approximately $9 million represents Dennis's accumulated illegal share. The rest, over $18 million, was merely being parked in your joint bank account temporarily. Raymond Stokes likely needed a safe, invisible holding place while he restructured his offshore distribution network. Your husband provided that safe house. The 2 massive withdrawals I had seen, the $800,000 and the $1.1 million, Howard traced them. They had gone directly into Raymond Stokes's personal offshore accounts. Dennis had known. Dennis had willingly participated. And Dennis, in dying so suddenly, had accidentally trapped Raymond Stokes's $18 million inside a joint account that now legally belonged entirely to me. I sat in Sandra's office and felt the floor literally shift beneath my feet. The man I had loved and trusted for 26 years had been living a dangerous, criminal, parallel life. He had not told me. He had not protected me. He had simply died, leaving me holding a ticking time bomb. I was now in possession of millions of dollars that Raymond Stokes, a ruthless criminal, believed belonged to him. "Carol," Sandra said, her voice cutting through my spiraling thoughts. "We need to talk about your options right now, because whoever left you that voicemail already knows you found the money. Raymond Stokes is circling." Sandra's advice was terrifying but incredibly direct. We needed to strike first. We needed to move before Raymond did. The funds in the joint account were legally mine by survivorship, but if Raymond Stokes or the federal government moved first, I could lose everything to a civil forfeiture claim, or worse, face criminal prosecution for tax evasion and money laundering. The plan had two parts. First, Sandra would voluntarily contact the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We would fully disclose the account, hand over Howard's evidence, and offer me up as a cooperative, innocent witness. Stepping into the light voluntarily was our only legal shield. Second, we would petition the probate court to legally reopen Dennis's estate, dragging the hidden money out of the shadows and placing it under the bright, protective glare of a federal judge. It was a nuclear option. It meant destroying my husband's legacy forever. But it was clean, it was legal, and it meant I swung first. Sandra filed the massive stack of paperwork on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, she had formally spoken with a lead agent at the IRS field office in Atlanta, turning over all of Dennis's secrets. I went home that Friday evening and cooked dinner, chicken and rice, the exact same meal I had made for Dennis every Friday for a decade. I sat at the empty kitchen table, ate it alone in the silence, and thought, I have done something completely irreversible today. There was agonizing grief in that realization. It meant Dennis was no longer someone I could protect from the world's judgment. He would be remembered as a criminal, but underneath the grief there was something else. Something fierce and hot that I hadn't felt in 14 months. Agency. Power. I had done something. I had chosen to fight back. I actually slept for 5 solid hours that night. It was the best rest I had managed since the day at the bank. But the peace didn't last. The phone call came on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I answered it without looking at the caller ID. The voice on the other end of the line was smooth, thick with a southern accent, and utterly, terrifyingly familiar from 26 years of holiday dinners and old wedding videos. It was Raymond Stokes. He did not waste a single second on pleasantries. "Carol," he said softly, "just my name." But he said it in the specific, chilling tone of a dangerous man who believed his patience was a form of generosity. "I think you and I need to have a little talk about what you've been doing this week." My blood ran completely cold. He knew. Of course he knew. He had eyes inside the banks, inside the courts. Dennis had once told me Raymond was a man who kept his fingers in everything. I forced my voice to remain perfectly, rigidly level. "Raymond, I don't think there is anything for us to discuss." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. "Then I'm going to say this exactly once as an old friend," Raymond said, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper. "Whatever paperwork you just filed, whatever you've said to whoever you've spoken with, walk it back, Carol. You do not understand the full picture here. Dennis made certain agreements with certain people, and those agreements do not just disappear because his heart stopped." "What kind of agreements?" I asked, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "The kind," Raymond said coldly, "that could make your life very, very complicated. You're holding funds you didn't earn, funds that belong to other people. Now, you claim you didn't know about them. But how does that really look to a jury, Carol? Do you look like an innocent grieving widow? Or do you look like a woman who has been quietly spending dirty money for years and is now trying to steal the rest?" It was a threat, brilliantly framed as concern. the most dangerous kind of manipulation. "I have an attorney, Raymond," I said, my voice shaking just a fraction. "All future communications should go directly through her." "You're making a mistake, Carol," he said softly. "Dennis was a reasonable man. Until he wasn't. And then, well, things got very complicated for him, too." Click. The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. My knees suddenly gave out, and I sank down onto the kitchen floor. Dennis was reasonable. Until he wasn't. Dennis's heart attack had been so incredibly sudden, so unexpected. I sat alone on the cold tile, shivering violently as the true, horrifying reality of my situation finally closed its jaws around me. Raymond Stokes wasn't just threatening my money. He was threatening my life. Okay, let me pause right here. The things that happened next, the federal depositions, the terrifying visit to my home, and the ultimate showdown with Raymond Stokes, changed me into someone I barely recognize. If you want to hear how I took down my husband's criminal empire and fought for my own survival, let me know in the comments and I will release part 2. Until then, stay safe and always check your bank accounts. Welcome back. If you listened to part 1, you know the terrifying reality I had just woken up to. My late husband had been laundering millions of dollars for a criminal enterprise. I had just turned the $27 million joint account over to the IRS, and the architect of the entire scheme, my husband's former best friend, Raymond Stokes, had just called to threaten my life. Dennis was a reasonable man, Raymond had told me over the phone, until he wasn't, and then things got very complicated for him, too. Dennis's heart attack had been incredibly sudden. Sitting on my kitchen floor, I suddenly wondered if it had been a heart attack at all. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called my attorney, Sandra. I told her every word of Raymond's veiled threat. Sandra was completely unsurprised. "He's testing you, Carol," she said, her voice sharp and clinical. "He's trying to see what you know and exactly how scared you are. The fact that he called you directly instead of using his attorneys tells me everything. He has absolutely no clean legal standing. If he did, he'd have lawyers doing the talking. Document the call. We do not back down." A few days later, my neighbor Diane dropped off a casserole on my porch. I had confided in her about the sheer loneliness of realizing my husband had kept a massive secret life from me. She looked at me and said something that finally allowed me to breathe. "Carol, the fact that you didn't know doesn't make you foolish. It means he worked incredibly hard to make sure you didn't know. That is on him, not you." I had desperately needed to hear that. But the psychological warfare from Raymond's camp was just beginning. Later that week, I received an overly sweet, gushing email from Dennis's sister, Lorraine. Lorraine and I had never been close. She was usually cold and judgmental. But suddenly, she was emailing to say she missed me, that she wanted to take me to dinner, and that she had some thoughts that might help me with what comes next. I forwarded it straight to Sandra. "Raymond and Lorraine have known each other for decades," Sandra warned me. "Raymond is using her. He wants to send someone you might trust to find out exactly what you're planning. She's likely carrying a bribe." I politely declined Lorraine's invitation. She replied instantly, saying she was there whenever I was ready. The speed of her reply told me everything. She was sitting by her phone, waiting for instructions. I locked my doors. I documented every strange car that drove past my house, and I waited with a cold, hard steadiness that surprised even me. There is a particular kind of calm that comes not from the absence of danger, but from a clear, settled decision that you will not be moved. I had made my decision. They came on a Sunday. I saw the silver rental SUV pull up from my kitchen window. Lorraine got out first, wearing a cream-colored blouse and a practiced, gracious smile. Raymond Stokes came around from the passenger side. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. He was heavier now, silver-haired, dressed in the expensive, casual way of men who want you to know they have power. He was carrying a small gift bag. I took a slow, deep breath. Then I opened the front door before they could even knock. "Carol." Lorraine gasped, opening her arms for a hug I did not return. "You look wonderful." I did not step back to let them in. I blocked the doorway. "Lorraine, Raymond, I wasn't expecting you." "We should have called," Raymond smiled, a smile that had probably worked on a great many victims. "But we were worried about you. We're family, Carol. That doesn't stop just because Dennis is gone." They were not my family, but I stepped aside and let them into my living room because Sandra had told me, "If they approach you, let them talk. Document everything. Commit to nothing." Raymond set the gift bag on the coffee table. Wine and expensive chocolates. A pathetic performance of normalcy. He spoke first. He was incredibly skilled at manipulation. He talked about his friendship with Dennis. He talked about how complicated Dennis's business had become, framing their massive money laundering operation as just good men caught in difficult circumstances. "The money in that account," Raymond finally said carefully, leaning forward, "is complicated, Carol. There are parties who have legitimate claims to it, and the way you're handling this, going through the government, it doesn't protect you. It exposes you. Dennis would not have wanted this." Lorraine chimed in right on cue. "He loved you. The choices you're making right now could take everything from you. Your house, your reputation, your relationship with your son. Is that what you want?" I looked at them. I thought about the $27 million. I thought about the veiled threats against my life. "Raymond," I said, my voice perfectly level, "are you asking me to withdraw my cooperation from a federal criminal investigation?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm asking you to consider a private resolution, something that protects everyone. And if I don't?" The polite mask slipped. His eyes went dead and cold. "I'm hoping you'll be reasonable, Carol." "There's a number," Lorraine added quickly, glancing at Raymond. "A financial number we think would be fair for you to keep personally, to recognize your position." They were literally trying to bribe me with my own money. They were offering me a cut of the funds legally sitting in my account, in exchange for handing them the rest and lying to the IRS. I stood up. "I appreciate you coming," I said, gesturing to the door. "I'll let my attorney know you visited. Please direct any further communication to her office." Raymond stood up slowly. "You're making a massive mistake, Carol." "Possibly," I said, "but it's mine to make. Get out." After I locked the door behind them, I sank against the wall. I was terrified, yes, but the fear had clarified everything. I picked up my phone, called Sandra, and told her they had just attempted to bribe a federal witness. The hammer finally dropped in February, 7 months after my first visit to Sandra's office. The federal depositions took place in a windowless conference room in downtown Atlanta. Present were IRS agents, a ruthless Department of Justice attorney named Whitfield, my lawyer Sandra, and our forensic accountant. I had been deposed weeks earlier, answering every question honestly. But today was Raymond Stokes's turn. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Sandra gave me the full, glorious breakdown later. Raymond arrived with 2 expensive attorneys, brimming with absolute confidence. For the first hour, he smoothly lied. He claimed his company was a legitimate consulting firm and that he knew nothing about any fraud. And then, Attorney Whitfield opened a folder. She introduced the wire transfer records, the internal emails, and finally, the text messages recovered from Dennis's hidden second cell phone. The texts between my husband and Raymond were utterly damning. They openly discussed moving illegal funds to dodge taxes. But there was one specific text message that Whitfield read aloud that stopped my heart. A text from my husband, Dennis, to Raymond Stokes regarding the millions of dollars, making sure Carol's name is on it, so it looks clean. When Sandra read that sentence to me later in the parking garage, I broke down and cried. Dennis hadn't put the money in a joint account to share it with me or to protect me. He did it because my name made the account look like a boring, innocent household savings account. I had been used as a human shield for years. When those text messages were placed in front of Raymond Stokes, his arrogance shattered. He tried to backtrack. He tried to claim the texts were taken out of context, but Whitfield mercilessly walked him through every single lie. By mid-afternoon, Raymond was sweating. He contradicted himself 7 times. In the final hour of the deposition, Raymond Stokes was forced to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination 11 times. He was completely broken. Lorraine was brought in next as a material witness. When they showed her the emails proving she had fully known about the criminal enterprise and helped manipulate Dennis, she burst into tears. I felt no pity for her. 2 days later, the DOJ formally cleared me. I was officially classified as a non-culpable third party. I was totally innocent. In April, Raymond Stokes was indicted on 6 federal counts, including wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction. Knowing he was trapped, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to forfeit over $14 million in assets. They seized his Buckhead mansion. They seized his properties in Florida. They even seized his precious Porsche. Lorraine was ordered by a judge to surrender $340,000 in dirty money she had received from Raymond over the years. She ended up having to sell her house to pay it back. But then came the question of the bank account. After months of tracing the funds, the IRS determined that $11.2 million was directly tied to the fraud. That money was seized by the government. But the remaining balance? $16,200,000? The forensic accountants proved that it was composed of Dennis's legitimate income and accumulated interest over 20 years. Because I was a legally cleared, non-culpable surviving joint account holder, that money was mine. $16,200,000. I won't pretend I felt triumphant. I felt the immense moral weight of that money. It existed because my husband had lied to me every single day. But I was not going to give it away to people who had no claim to it. I set up a strictly managed trust. I immediately donated a massive, multi-million-dollar sum to the Community Health Foundation at the hospital where I had worked for 2 decades. I set aside a secure trust fund for my son, Michael, and then I quietly quit my job. My department had cried at my goodbye lunch. I had loved the work, but I no longer needed to work for survival. The very first thing I did with my freedom was buy a first-class ticket to Portugal. Dennis had always made excuses not to go. Now, I had no one to negotiate with. I rented a beautiful apartment in Lisbon for 3 weeks. I walked the cobblestone streets. I drank wine by the river. For the first time in years, I let myself simply exist. When I returned to Georgia, I sold the house I had shared with Dennis. I bought a beautiful, smaller home with a screened-in porch and a garden. I painted the study a vibrant, deep shade of green, a color Dennis had always hated. Standing in that green room, holding a paintbrush, I felt something in my chest finally unlock. My son Michael came to visit, and we sat on the porch for 4 days, talking through the anger and the grief. We rebuilt our relationship from the ground up, stronger and more honest than it had ever been. Today, I volunteer 3 mornings a week as a patient navigator at a free health clinic. I use my 19 years of hospital billing experience to help terrified patients fight back against insurance companies. It is the most satisfying work of my life. I did not ask for any of the betrayal that happened to me. I did not ask for the danger, the lies, or the grief. But standing on my porch today, looking out at my garden, I know exactly who I am. I am a woman forged in a fire I didn't start, who walked out of the ashes holding the deed to her own life. If you suddenly found yourself holding $27 million of dirty money and a dangerous man was knocking at your door, what would you have done? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments. If my story gave you strength, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs a reminder to take their power back. Until next time, trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel small.